Successful people are too busy to notice their success. And that's how it should be. The people that notice their success are the people that are on social media flashing it to you. And that's wrong. You should be focused on your trade. You should be focused on being great, and all the great ones. Then once they retire, or when somebody asks them a question about, hey, Jordan, what about your 6 championships? Then you can look back and you can say, wow, I was able to do all that. But in the moment, you can't do that, and Kobe Bryant's got a great line about this. He was in the playoffs, and I tell people about this all the time, in an interview, and he was up 2-0. And this reporter asked him, why aren't you smiling? You're up 2-0 in the playoffs. And he goes, job's not finished. He goes, we won the championship yet? No, job's not finished. And I love that. This is one of the greatest players in the world. And he's still not satisfied being up 2-0 against somebody in the playoffs because he knows the job's not done. He knows that it's not time yet to look back on the season, with happiness. He's still focused on the end goal, which is winning a championship. And that's how we focus on every one of our projects. Is I have blinders on. I don't care about my competitors. I don't care about my naysayers. All I am focused on is completing that project and having a successful outcome for our investors and bankers. That's it. That's my singular focus. Maybe ADHD gives me that advantage, but that's all I focus on. And then when it's finally done and I send that email out, letting people know what their returns are going to be, then that's my look back. That's when I get a chance to go, okay, now we got it. Let's go on to the next one now.
This is Country Club Conversations. I'm Raj Tut, founder and CEO of Storyboard Living. This show gives you actionable insights from the hard-to-reach top percentile in business and entrepreneurship. I think everyone deserves this type of access, and I'm bringing it to you. Welcome to the club. Jarrad, thank you for being on the show.
Happy to be here, Raj.
You are a partner at a law firm.
Yes.
And the founder, president of 1904 Group. You own over 500 apartments in the city of St. Louis. Is that right?
Yes.
And you started in 2007. So very rapid growth. And I think I saw somewhere that the 500 apartments encompasses over 100 developments. Is that right?
So we've done over 150 projects over the course of my career. We have today somewhere between 500 and 600 units. That's probably goes across somewhere between 50 and 60 buildings. I lose track, but somewhere in there.
I do want to get into the details of that because I'm sure that's a monster in itself in terms of operations.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, would love to know your background, how you grew up, where you came from. Because one thing I find a lot of things fascinating about you, but you have a unique ability to be in the weeds and in the clouds at the same time. So I would imagine you have a unique background in terms of how you grew up.
Oh, I think someone's background is incredibly important. I'll paraphrase Sigmund Freud, and he said, if you want to understand anything about anybody, learn about their childhood, and you've got a good understanding of how they're going to turn out and why they act the way that they do. So, born and raised in St. Louis, went to Kirkwood High School. I grew up in a family where my parents divorced at a young age, and it wasn't like a typical divorce situation where, your parents lived in the same town. So I stayed at my father's house, and then my mom lived in California and then eventually Virginia, and would usually come in town once a month to see us. So it wasn't the same kind of dynamic that most people think of, when you go through a divorce like that. So I had a lot of independence growing up because of that. And we had this kind of facade of being middle class. And every now and then you would touch into things that were middle class. But, it was always kind of my dad going from job to job and coming up with this idea or that idea, entrepreneurial in that respect, but not working. And so I started working at a young age. I would shovel driveways of snow and mow lawns, and I would do anything to make money. And then when I was 15 years old, I got my first job working at Walgreens. And so during the school week, I would work a couple days a week, 4 to 11. I have no idea how that's legal today, but I'd get up to Walgreens at like 3:30, and then I would get there and then get done finishing cleaning up the store at around 11, and then I'd bike home and I'd get home at like 11:30, and then I was on the bus again, at 7:30 the next morning. So that taught me a lot of really good lessons early on in life to understand what it was like for people that had difficult jobs, people in the service industry like that, people being on their feet all day. It taught me how to hustle. Another thing I encountered growing up in the second grade, I remember vividly, I was in Miss Miller's class at Westchester Elementary. And I remember they brought me into this room and they said, Jarrad, we just got back your standardized test scores and they're really, really bad. You did poorly on them. And I think that they saw that as a major, major red flag that mentally something was going wrong with me. They said, well, we've got two paths for you. You can either be placed in the special school district and be taken out of the elementary school there, or we can put you in this resource program and try to help you along with some of the things that you're dealing with. And so I was diagnosed with ADHD at a very young age. I think people use that term very lightly today because we have a lot of distractions thrown at us. But anyone that knows me really well will clearly tell you, like, I have it.
Okay.
And it was very difficult to learn how to adjust to its powers. And so from second grade through sixth grade, I got straight C's and D's. Like, I couldn't get a good grade to save my life. And I was constantly in the principal's office. I was getting in fights. It was a very, difficult time for me in terms of learning. And I remember vividly, I was in social studies class in sixth grade. And I remember talking with this other student that was next to me named Emily Mole. And she was the smartest kid in the class. And I just said, what makes you so smart? And she said, I work really hard. And for some reason that clicked in my mind. It wasn't a teacher, it wasn't a mentor, it wasn't anything like that. It was just one of my peers saying that to me. And from seventh grade, until I finished high school, I was on the dean's list. They actually kicked me out of the special school district resource program when I was in the eighth grade because they deemed that I was too smart for it. But growing up that way taught me a lot of lessons in terms of how to persevere, how to have grit, how to have discipline, and just being able to overcome obstacles and know that there's always a light at the end of the tunnel if you keep pursuing it.
When you were diagnosed with ADHD, were you put on medication?
So my parents were advised to put me on medication, and I'm incredibly thankful that I was never put on medication. And I've met people that have ADHD and they're on medication, and in my personal opinion, I advise against it. I think the mind is a beautiful thing, and I think when you have ADHD, as I stated earlier, it gives you incredible powers that nobody else has. I think it's somewhere around less than 10% of the population has ADHD. And, my wife knows these powers by heart. I have an incredible amount of energy. Every day I am up on the button between 4:30 and 5 a.m. and I'm ready to go, and I'm not yawning, and I'm working out, and, I'm shooting off text and posting things on LinkedIn and, shooting out emails to people, and people are just like, man, how is this guy like wired like this? And it allows me to have hyper focus on things that I'm really interested in and an ability to memorize things a lot faster than other people. And the key thing about memorization is the ability to retain it, regurgitate it, understand it, and then repeat it. And so in things that I'm very interested in, I've always been able to do that because of this power that I have. The negatives that come with it are, if you get bored by something, you're easily distracted and you get tired and you yawn and you start looking away. And so people might look at that and they might feel that you're disrespecting them. And that's not that. It's part of it is it's something I can't help. I get bored by you, I'm just going to stop interacting with you and I'll move on to the next person. But I to each his own, and whatever you feel comfortable with. But, in my personal situation, I'm incredibly grateful that my parents did not take the route of, putting me on Ritalin or any of the other ADHD drugs that are out there.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just sticking with the ADHD, this was new to me. I had no clue, but it makes a lot of sense, I think. So Did you, by design, build your company in a way that kind of ties into your personality? Over 100 developments or 150 projects. Those are a lot of small projects that require a lot of attention for a relatively short period of time before you
Yeah.
move on to the next, versus doing a 300 or 400 unit monster master plan development. Do you think that tied into it at all?
I, I think you'll find that the people with ADHD and with you know, people that are high functioning in terms of autism, they thrive in chaos. And I've always thrived in chaos. When economies are going crazy, I thrive in it. When we're having hyperinflation, when we're having, massive recessions, when we're having a pandemic, I thrive in all of those periods. And so when I have a lot of different projects going on, it's really entertaining for me because every project is at a different stage in the algorithm. I'll have one that's at a demo stage. I'll have another one that's at a framing stage. I'll have another one that's at a finish stage. And so that always allows me, I get bored with one, I jump to another one. I get bored with one, I jump to another one. And then, oh, we got this new deal going on over here. And oh, we're closing on this one. And, we're selling that one. And so that's the fun part about it, is that it's always exciting for me. It's always something new. And the best way that I can describe how a mind works with ADHD is take out your phone, like your iPhone, and put it on your music on shuffle. All right. And you start playing the music and you have no idea what's going to play. And it just moves to another thing and to another thing. And as you're shuffling through those songs, you're not going to like everything that comes up on the shuffle. So then you move to the next one and you move to the next one. And so my mind works that way. It's in a constant shuffle where I find the thing that I like and then I click on that one. And then I find the next thing that I like and I click on that one. And that keeps the energy going.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's a great way to put it. I've never heard it put that way before. So going back to when you were in school, you start to, quote, work hard, figure it out. When did you kind of realize that you wanted to go down the path of law? And was real estate even anything you were thinking about at that time? Maybe in high school, for example.
So I knew almost ever since I was a little kid, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I was always fascinated with the law, and I think in part because, of the circumstances that I grew up in. I was surrounded by middle class. I got invited to country clubs and I, learned how to play golf and I, went on trips with other people and I got to be exposed to it, but I didn't have that. But I learned how to do it and I absorbed it. And so I always had this kind of like David versus Goliath mentality of rising up and then fighting back against those people or those companies that would try to put down, the little man, so to speak. And so that's the thing that always attracted me about the law is that, you can step into a courtroom and within reason. I mean, obviously resources, play a very, very big part in terms of how successful you are in court. But if you've got the law on the side, if you've got the facts and evidence on your side, that you do have a chance to take on some pretty big people and actually win. And so that part of it really, really intrigued me. And the law ties into one of my favorite subjects, which is history. And in the legal business, when you're arguing in front of the judge, you're arguing based on things that have occurred in the past. So it's evidence that's already set in motion. It's facts that have happened in the past. It's case law that has happened in the past. And so a lot of that is just memorization of those things and then taking those and applying them to the current set of facts and evidence that you have, and then hoping that that certain outcome occurs. And you can say that for a lot of different things in terms of investments or other things in your life, is that if you have a good understanding of the past, you'll have a pretty good idea of how you got to the present and then fairly good idea of what's going to happen in the future. And I'm not going to say it's going to repeat, but there's a good chance that it'll rhyme. And so I knew from a fairly early age that I wanted to become a lawyer, and my track was that. I left St. Louis when I was 17 years old, and I graduated. I went to my first year. I went to University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. I transferred from there to Virginia Tech just so I could get in-state tuition where my mom was living at the time. And I studied history and political science there. I graduated from college in 3 years. Because I had a bunch of college credit coming in. I was going to school on a combination of school loans and scholarships and Pell Grants. To qualify for Pell Grants, your parents have to have a combined income of less than 50,000. So that gives you an idea of the circumstances that I was coming from. But I knew that I could get really, really good grades in those subjects. And that was going to be, my way to get into a good law school, because I knew that my standardized test scores were not going to get me there. I mean, I scored, and I'm very open about this. I scored, I think, on the ACT a 17 or an 18. I scored on the SAT a 980. I scored on the LSAT a 147. If you look up any of those scores, I mean, that's in the bottom 25%. I mean, it's horrible. I'm a horrible test taker. And people with ADHD are notorious for being horrible standardized test takers. But the way that I looked at it, I'm like, why are you comparing what I do in 4 hours versus what I did over 3 years where I graduated in the top 10% of my major? That to me is more important. I showed up every single day. I performed, versus 4 hours. That means nothing to me. So that's kind of how my mind clicked on that. And, from undergrad, went into law school, incredibly grateful, that I was able to go to Florida State. It's a very, very difficult school. I believe it's somewhere around a top 50 law school in the country. And, came back to St. Louis and, took the bar exam the following year. And that kind of ties into how I got into real estate. I had about 6 months before I was to take the bar exam.
For context, what year was this?
So this would have been, I graduated from Virginia Tech, undergrad in December of 2001. And then my summers I would work in law firms, which is pretty cool. How I got to do that being in college and not being in law school, I guess is another question you can ask me, but
let's ask it.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of interesting. All right. Well, I'll talk about it real quick.
Yeah.
So I always want to be a lawyer. And I was like, so when I went out to Virginia, I first started working at Sears, and I was selling, and this was like during the dot-com boom. And so Northern Virginia is very wealthy where I was living at the time. And people were coming in and buying these several $1,000 treadmills, like there were a dozen donuts. And I was on commission and I was killing it. Like I dominated all the salespeople on the floor, to a point where the manager would come in and see my sales. And he was just like, all right, you can go home for today. Like you've done enough. And so my sophomore year, I'm looking at how do I build my resume? I learned, I had a lot of great experiences working at places like Sears and Champs Sporting Goods and American Eagle and Walgreens. But I thought, I need to build my resume more, and I need to be in a law firm. And so I went down to law firms wouldn't hire me because I wasn't in law school and I wasn't a graduate of law school. So I started to go to these legal like temp agencies. And I went to a placement agency that's still there in DC called Legal Placements Inc. And I come in the door and they look at me and they're like, you're a sophomore in college. Like normally, our placement or our temps are, have graduated from law school or have passed the bar, or, obviously already attorneys. But they saw that, I was smart, I was driven, I really, really want it. And they're like, you know what? You're really tall, you dress nice, you're smart, you carry yourself like nobody's going to ask any questions. So my first job that I get out of the gate, I work at King & Spalding off of Pennsylvania Avenue. King & Spalding is one of the top law firms in the South. Their number one client that they've had for ages is Coca-Cola. I'm working on an insurance defense case the entire summer, and I'm getting paid really, really well. So this is back in the early 2000s, and I'm making $18 an hour. And then they're also paying me time and a half for overtime. So I'm showing up every day at 7:30 and I'm not leaving till 6:30. And the following 2 summers, I worked at one of the largest law firms in the world called Reed Smith. And I worked on an intellectual property case. And same thing. They gave me as much overtime as I wanted. So, I mean, I was making tons of money every single week. And for a guy in his, 20s, I was just shocked that I was able to do that for essentially, a college job. So take that experience. I go down to Florida State, graduate, come back to St. Louis in July of 2005.
And did you always know you'd be back in St. Louis?
Had no idea. No idea. I wasn't supposed to be. So when I was in Tallahassee, the firm that I was at down there, the wonderful people down there, they had offered me a job to stay there. I had clerked the last 2 summers at a firm in Pittsburgh called Vano and Gray. They were wonderful. I absolutely loved them. And it's because I'd followed this lady that I was dating at the time. And I thought that I was going to end up in Pittsburgh. And we had gotten engaged, and about a month before we were going to get married, 3 weeks before I was to take the bar exam, like, she cut things off. And
that must have made it hard to study.
yeah. So I nixed that idea of staying in Pennsylvania and obviously taking the bar there. And it was really interesting. I got a call from my brother, and I had a really easy path back to Florida. Warm weather, I was going to be at Florida State, which is, amazing place to be. I had a job there, all this thing, security, essentially. And my brother calls me and he just says, come back to St. Louis. I've got a house here. You can stay with me for free. I'll help you get you back on your feet. And the confidence that he had in his voice just resonated with me, and there are very, very few people that can do that. And, he's one of them. And, I was like, you know what? It's time for me to come back home, and this was after 7 years of, living all over the country. But leaving St. Louis taught me so much. And I think it's incredibly important for people that live in St. Louis to leave St. Louis, because you don't understand what we have here until you leave and you explore the rest of the country, and I mentioned this on another podcast before, but, Mark Twain has a great quote, and I'll paraphrase it. And he said that travel is fatal to prejudice and bigotry and narrow-mindedness. And he's 100% correct. Mark Twain was born in this town, northern Missouri, called Florida, Missouri, grew up in Hannibal, kind of a closeted environment back then. But he was exposed to another life on the river. And, he became a travel writer, and then he went all over the world. And it totally broadened his viewpoint on how things were. And that helped me appreciate everything that we have back in St. Louis by being away from it. It helped me appreciate the people. It helped me appreciate the food, the history, the culture, the architecture, everything about it. So I came back to St. Louis with a new set of eyes and a new set of appreciation for it, where I wanted to come back and be like, all right, how do I make this even better? Because this place is amazing. Let's go after it even more. And so while I was staying with my brother, he had a couple multifamily buildings in the city, and he was like, hey, I'm rehabbing these right now. Can you come help me on them? And so they were in this area of the city called Tower Grove. And, I would come down there and I would help them demo and paint, and my carpentry skills are limited. But I really enjoyed it. And I caught the rehab bug while I was doing it.
And how was Tower Grove back then? Was this very early, like in its turnaround, let's call it?
Oh my God. Yes. Tower Grove back in 2005 would have been maybe 40% developed, maybe 50 at best. No, it was not. Tower Grove is an amazing neighborhood today. It was nowhere close to that back then. I think that it had all the trappings to be something that was great. And I think it's a poster child of how you can turn things around in a relatively short period of time, through investment and dedication and, community involvement. But I caught the rehab bug being around my brother, and, the business model of it really made sense to me. You find a property, it's undervalued, you fix it up, you rent it out. As long as you're covering your expenses, anything that's left over is profit. It clicked with me. And I've always had that kind of entrepreneurial spirit ever since I was little. And so, I passed the bar, I believe that would have been April of 2006. And that whole entire year, I talked about, I looked at properties, I put a contract on a 2-family in the 3500 block of Juniata. I didn't get it. And I just kept talking about getting into this business. But I got to a point where I was like, where am I going with my life? And that's kind of an odd thing to say at 26. I passed the bar. I'm now a lawyer. I spent my last 7 years in school. Who says that of like, where am I going with my life when I've already accomplished this thing that's really difficult to do? And for me, it wasn't enough. For me, I have much, much higher expectations for myself. And so I was like, I have to find a way to make money. And the real estate game is the one I want to play. That's what I want to get into.
Did you land a job at that point?
Yes. Okay. So my first law job when I was practicing was at a firm on the Landing in downtown St. Louis called Reinert and Rourke. And they had me, I was billing somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 hours a year. Okay. And, I'm working down there. My starting salary, I think, was somewhere between $55,000 and $60,000. Okay. And so I'm coming out of school. I've got over 6 figures in debt. I have a negative net worth. And I'm making a salary where I'm like, I have friends of mine that didn't even go to law school that are making more money than me. I've got to get this together. I've got to start making more money, if I'm going to pay back these loans. And so in 2007, I finally decided to make the jump. And I had a friend of mine approach me with financing, which is absolutely crazy, which is 100% financing. And, they said, well, we'll leverage the fact that you're making a decent salary, you got a good credit score. We'll give you 100%, financing to buy this 2-family. And so I bought a 2-family in June of 2007 at 4125 Juniata. That was my first building. And then they were like, well, do you want to get some more? And I was like, well, yeah, let's do it. And so I bought a 4-family at 4120 to 22 Shaw, and then another 2-family a couple months later at 4117 Cleveland. That's absolutely crazy. Who buys 3 rehab projects? Personally guarantees them. When I say buys, I'm using that lightly. But who does that with zero experience? Nobody does that. But I looked at it and I was like, what do I have to lose? It's kind of like the line from, Bob Dylan, when you have nothing, you have nothing to lose. But it's the best time in the world to take risk is when you have no responsibility, you have nothing to lose. And I think getting into something like that when you're ignorant about what you're doing is the best time to do it. Because I would work all day as a lawyer, and then I would go down there at nighttime and on the weekends, and I would work on these buildings. And if my girlfriend at the time, who's not my wife, if she wanted to see me, she'd have to come down and help me do demo work or help, paint or whatever. And so when I say I was working 7 days a week, day and night, I literally was doing it every single day to try to get these things going. And I eventually finish up all 3 of those rehabs after working on them for over a year. I lived in the bottom unit at 4122 Shaw, apartment 1 West. I remember it. And I was, I think, $70,000 or $80,000 in debt on credit cards. So I'm paying like 18, 19% on this every single month.
And this was for a lot of the materials you used to rehab the deals?
Oh, it was materials. It was cost overruns. It was contractors that screwed me and did poor, horrible work. And then I had to hire other ones. And going through that experience was incredibly important because you learn more from scars than you do from scratches. And I think, and those 3 buildings literally laid the foundation for everything that I've done after that. And I still carry a lot of the lessons from those 3 buildings to our current projects that we have today.
And this was around, you said 07, correct?
07 and then to 08.
Okay.
And, the ironic part about that is I just locked in a deal the other day. We closed on at 7.25%. My first deals that I locked in loans on were in the summer of 2008 after I was up with my construction loans at 7.25%. So it's literally come full circle.
Full circle, yeah. So the first deals, those were floating rate debt in 07, 100% financing for the acquisition at least.
Correct.
And when did things start to go south in terms of the macro environment? Because one can look at that as either perfect timing or really bad timing to start. And by the sound of it, it was perfect timing for you to start around 07.
Timing is everything. And that's why luck is a massive part of it. I was talking about this the other day online, and someone was telling me, well, it's all about risk taking and it's all about hard work and da-da-da. I mean, yeah, that sounds good, to motivate people, but in all reality, it's luck. When he made that comment, it started joggling my mind about this chapter that Malcolm Gladwell has in one of his books. And he talks about the importance of when you're born. He said, if you look at the tech titans, Ellison, Jobs, Gates, they're all born within 10 years of one another. That's not by luck. There's a reason for that. Because when you look at their timing, they started right at the birth of the technology revolution. And you could say the same thing. Like I started looking back further. Look at the ages of the birth years of Henry Ford, the Dodge brothers. It's literally within 10 years.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. One of the co-founders of GM, within 10 years of all those guys.
Outliers, I think, is the book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so the fact that I was born in, December 1st, 1979, my timing lined up perfectly for the Great Recession because I was out of law school. I didn't have the responsibilities that are associated with, a wife and kids and all those things. And I was ready to take risks. And so my timing was perfect. And in the summer of 2007, it was already hitting. The buildings that I bought were foreclosures,
Okay.
with the exception of the Shaw building. But the Cleveland building and the Juniata building were foreclosures. And then in 08 and 09, that's when it really started to hit, and 10. And it was the most amazing time period in the world because I had 07 and 08 to build my foundation, to make all the mistakes. And then I had all the years after that in which to go out and understand how to look for deals. And then investors would come to me with money and they were like, you already know how to do this. I didn't lose it all during the Great Recession. I was just building it. And so my timing on that could not have been more perfect. And that had everything to do with luck. Granted, I worked hard on these buildings and, I took risks doing them, all that. But if I was off in that calculus by 5 years, either direction, I would have missed arguably one of the greatest buying windows in the history of real estate over the last century.
Agreed. Yeah, luck is without a doubt a big part of it, but you put yourself in a position to get lucky. And if you were born in another era, maybe you would have been a Henry Ford type of person. You never know.
True. There's a lot of other factors though.
Yeah.
You look at, and I thought about this when this gentleman made this comment. You have a 4% chance of being an American citizen. There's over 8 billion people in the world. There's 330 million people here in the United States. You have a 4% chance of winning that birth lottery or citizenship lottery.
Yep.
So you have to be incredibly lucky right off the bat. Okay. Then where are you born? What part of the country are you born in? What's the cost of living like there? What are the opportunities that you're exposed to in terms of the family that you're born into? If you're born into a family that's college educated, you have a 25% greater likelihood of going to college than you do if your family wasn't college educated, which gives you a massive advantage. And then if you're born into a family then that sends you off to really good schools. Like I was reading something the other day that said that if you went to the University of Pennsylvania, that your salary was $80,000 higher than everybody else on average, just because you went to that one school.
Wow.
So does it affect where you were born, what country you were born in, what location of the country you were born in, and then the parents you grew up with, the schools that you attended? All that has a massive, massive impact. That's luck.
Yeah, or even being healthy.
And being healthy, yeah. Having genes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great point. This episode is brought to you by Storyboard Living. We're actively buying apartment communities in the St. Louis region, Southern Illinois, and Southern Missouri. We make transactions easy, and we've never gone under contract on an acquisition that we didn't close. We also offer a finder's fee and broker's bonus for off-market deals. If you have a property that may be a good fit for us, email deals@storyboardliving.com. That's deals@storyboardliving.com. So you worked hard, but you were also lucky. Got that without a doubt.
Yeah.
That buying opportunity from, let's call it 07 to 2011 or 2012. Do you think something like that will ever come back again? Do you have any thoughts on where we're headed in the next few years? And I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, and we'll get back to your story, but I just thought...
Sure. I'll break that question down. So first, do I think it'll happen again? 100% yes. We'll see it again in our lifetime. And I don't know if it's going to be as severe as the Great Recession. I do not think that it's going to be something along the lines of the Great Depression. I think the likelihood of that happening is a lot less because we've learned a lot of the lessons from the Great Depression by pumping money into the economy to help prop things up, by dropping the interest rate to zero or close to it to help spur, lending and spending and all these things. But the likelihood of another Great Recession in our lifetime, it's 100% going to happen. Not a doubt in my mind. And the reason for that is a lot of decisions made around money are made based on emotion, not based on logic. When you think about, let's say, going to the store and getting a dozen donuts, all right? That's an emotional purchase, okay? It's not a logical purchase because logically, that's going to do a lot more harm to you than it's going to do good for you. And go to that store and you eat a dozen donuts every single day. And you do that over a period of a couple of years, you're going to see some pretty bad things happen. Logically, if you exercise on a weekly basis, the benefits that it's going to have for you in the long run are great. But the thing is that most people don't do that. Most people want instant gratification. And so they want to find the easier way to do something, the easier way to make money. And so because we're drawn to this easier way of making money, you look on social media and you see people flashing, the dollars and the cars and the private jets and the mansions and all this. And it makes it look like money is really easy to make. And for the most part, it's not, unless you're doing something illegal, or you win the actual lottery, the birth lottery, the marriage lottery. Money is not easily made in this country. But people see that, and so they'll gravitate towards a fast buck, an emotional buck, over a logical dollar. And so because of that, and banks feed into that. They know that they're smarter than the people that they're lending to. They know that. But they know that they're serving their shareholders. So they know that it behooves them to continue to generate profits, so they have higher salaries, so their stock price goes up, so they continue to have a job. They don't care about the products that they're selling down to, the people that are buying them. And they know that there's a really good chance that it could drive the company to the ground. But they're hoping, maybe things will change and the economy will do this or that and we'll be okay. But emotionally, they know that humans are going to make that decision versus the logical decision 99 times out of 100. So do I think it's going to happen again? 100% it will happen again. Regulations will get relaxed. People will take their foot, off the gas pedal and slow down a little bit. And, sadly, it'll happen again. And then your other question, you'll have to forgive me. I forgot it.
Just going back to this, do you think it'll happen again within a decade or just at some point in our lifetime?
So your other question was, what's the outlook for the next couple of years?
Yeah.
The outlook for the next couple of years, we're in a high interest rate period right now. I think that is going to continue for another 18 months, give or take. There's going to be some squeezing. It's very similar to like a boa constrictor. The boa constrictor kills its prey slowly, not fast. And that's why it's so incredibly effective. And that's what interest rates are doing right now. Finally, the virus is setting in. It's kind of like right as you're getting sick and you're getting sick, you start to get a little tired, the temperature starts to come up, but the virus really hasn't hit you yet. And that's kind of how I look at high interest rates right now. It really hasn't hit us yet, but it's finally going to start hitting us sometime next year because people will understand that's the new normal. That's the new winter that is set in, where every day when you step outside and you think it's going to be sunny and warm, it's going to be winter for a good 12-month period of time. Now, there's light at the end of the tunnel, though, because our country operates on cheap debt. That's how we make money, all around.
For the last 2 decades, would you say?
Longer than that. We operate on cheap debt. And we operate on deficits. And we've been operating on deficits since the beginning of our country. I mean, we took on a ton of debt from France just to fight Britain in the war, American Revolution. So we've been operating on debt for a very, very long period of time. And the country has done phenomenal in doing it. And we're very diversified, in our GDP. So it enables us to be able to do that. But consumer spending represents over 60% of our GDP. So if you want to keep our economy humming, you have to have consumers spending money. In order to do that, you have to have cheaper debt. And so the light at the end of the tunnel is to know that the people that sit on the Fed board that make these interest rates decisions as to whether they're going to be dovish or hawkish, cut rates or raise rates, their terms are going to be ending. And you're going to have a new president who's going to be appointing people that are going to cut rates. And then Chairman Powell's term is going to be ending in March of 2026. There's no way he's getting renewed. No way. Regardless of whether the president is Republican or Democrat, they're going to put in somebody that will continue to cut rates. That's it. And that Senate will gladly confirm them. And so to say that, the next, 3 or 4 years, we're going to have nothing but high interest rates, that's absolutely foolish. I would bet against anybody that we are going to have interest rates cut within the next 24 months. And I would win that bet hands down every time because our country operates on cheap debt. And if you look at who pays for people to get into office, it's people with wealth and people that run these companies. they make more money off of cheap debt than they do expensive debt. So I think that's what you're going to see over the next couple of years.
And you're putting that on the record, so you have a lot of conviction in what you're saying.
Oh, I do, but I mean, it's not. The thing is, it's not. I mean, here's the thing: can I predict with certainty that if today is August 1st in St. Louis, that tomorrow it's not going to snow? Can I predict that with 99% certainty? Yeah, I'm not going to be 100% because almost nothing is 100%.
Yeah.
But I can predict that with 99% certainty based on what the new normal is at that time. Okay. When you look at the CPI, Consumer Price Index or something like that, when you look at how it's been trending downward over the last couple of years, the rise in interest rates is working. And it's eventually going to get to a point where consumers are squeezed enough and the Fed goes, okay, we've hit our 2% or we've hit something close to it. And, that could be a rolling recession that we're in or a sudden recession that we get into. But it will get to a point where people say, okay, we have to ease back. And if you look at the rise in interest rates or the cuts that have happened in interest rates over the last 30 years, and just look at the history of it, it follows the same trajectory. Up and down, up and down. It's kind of like an expanding rubber band and a contrasting rubber band.
Mm-hmm.
Blow it too much, snap it back. Blow it too much. That's how it works. And so I have absolute faith that rates are going to get cut. They're not staying over 7%, for a long period of time. I don't see that.
I agree with you, by the way, especially in the short term. I think that boa constrictor analogy was a great way to put it. I think in the apartment world or the commercial real estate world in general, we're going to see some distress as a result of rates remaining elevated for, let's call it 12 months or however long they're elevated for, and rising insurance costs, other increasing costs, and then perhaps some operators not being able to hit their pro forma rent projections. We've seen rent increases over the last few years that are probably unprecedented, but some folks were possibly, and I'm treading lightly here, were possibly projecting that out beyond just what we saw over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling a broker friend of mine this the other day, from 2020 to 2022, you had one of the greatest periods in the last 100 years of either securing loans from an interest rate perspective or refining. If you missed that window, that's on you. That's on you. And you might have bad luck where, you're stuck in a loan that you can't refi during that period of time and your term comes up and at the end of this year in 2024, and that's part of the game, and some people win, some people lose, but we knew this was coming. All right. We knew that it wasn't sustainable. I mean, the interest rate that's on my house is at 1.875. That's free money. That's absolutely insane. And I knew as soon as they offered me that, I was like, sure, I'll take your free money. But I knew it wasn't sustainable. And so beginning in I remember this vividly, March of 2020, pandemic hits and the Fed says, all right, we're cutting rates down to next to zero. I called up all my bankers, we had local bank debt, not institutional debt. And I said, I'd like to modify everything. And I want it to go out 7 years. And they said, sure. And so I locked into everything between 3.5% and 4% during that period of time. And then I went back to them again in January of 2022. And I said, I'd like to extend everything by another 2 years and I'll pay you 0.5 point. And they're like, sure, I'll do it again.
They probably loved that idea.
But the thing is that it wasn't hard to predict because you just looked at our debt to GDP ratio at that time and it was through the roof. It wasn't sustainable. And all you have to do is look at, inflation that happened, rapid inflation that happened at the end of World War II. We had a debt to GDP ratio that was over 120%, one of the highest in our history. What happened right after that? You had massive inflation. So these things aren't necessarily hard to predict if you understand the season that you're in. You and I both know August 1st, when we walk outside, we can predict it's probably going to be hot outside in St. Louis. We know that. If it's January 1st in St. Louis, we know within reason it's probably going to be 55 degrees or below during that period of time. If you understand the season that you're in based on the history of being in that environment, it's not as hard to predict. Yeah, you're going to get Indian summer days every once in a while where you have 75 degrees on, Valentine's Day in St. Louis. It's incredibly rare. For the most part, it will fall hook, line, and sinker in terms of on February 14th in St. Louis, it will be below 55 degrees. And you can say that with about 99% certainty, okay? Just based on the history of looking at weather in St. Louis over the last 100 years. And you can do something very, very similar in just looking at the economic history of the United States since the inception of the Fed. Go back to World War II and go forward. And you can have a pretty good idea of where things are going to land.
This type of macro or higher level thinking is what I was referring to when I said you're able to be in the clouds and the weeds at the same time. So just going back to 2010, 2011, 2012, were you thinking about any of this stuff at all? Or were you strictly in the weeds, executing, operating your business, trying to do deal after deal?
Every one of my lenders at that time will tell you the same thing they say today. I was always locking into long-term cheap debt. I knew that if I was locking into long-term cheap debt, it's very, very easy for me to pro forma what my returns are going to be. If I update all of my buildings right the first time, it's very easy for me to pro forma what my expenses are going to be at least 7 to 10 years out. And so, my thinking every time I do a deal, both back in 2010 and today, is I approach it like chess. I don't approach it like checkers. And I'm very methodical in that respect in terms of how I look at anything that I invest in. What does this look like 5 or 10 years from now? And if it makes sense to me then it makes sense to me in the present. But if that picture in the future is unclear to me, then I won't do it. But if I know that my debt is locked in for the next 10 years, what am I worrying about? I know that we're a great management company. I know that we'll continue to work hard to put off a good work product. I know if I continue to do that, my debt's going to be at this number. That's fine. That's one less worry at the table. And after that, in my mind, your only other variable is crime. And some of that you can help, some of that you can't. So
sure. And that's the crime, I would say, is a function of the neighborhoods that you decide to invest in and turn around. For us, it's not as much of a consideration, just given the fact that we're in rural areas and suburbs for the most part. And that's not to imply that things can't happen anywhere, but you purposefully go to neighborhoods that some groups don't go to. Like we for the most part, don't operate in the city. So when did you start to develop, number one, your passion for the city? And then number two, your current business model and what is 1904 Group today? The type of asset you buy, the neighborhoods you focus on, and other things that make up your company.
So I believe Nelson Mandela said that be the change that you want to see in the world, but you have to do it. You can't expect other people to do it, and I believe he also said it takes a drop to start a waterfall. And so I get really excited when I go into neighborhoods and there's not as much development and I have a blank slate to work with. And I get to see how I can turn a building around, what tenants can I bring in there, what rents can I get in there. And then once I prove that my concept can work, well, then I just hit repeat. But not only do I hit repeat, I also broadcast as loud as I can everything that we're doing. Because in real estate, a rising tide lifts all boats. I can't go around and buy every building. I'm not Walt Disney. I can't control the parcels. And so I want to encourage as many developers, investors, whatever you want to call them, to come down to the neighborhoods that I'm rehabbing in. And I want them to buy everything up around it too, and to help push that envelope. But you can't do that unless you talk about it. Maybe it's fine and dandy for some people to just stay quiet. I can't stay quiet, when I'm investing in the city. I have to be loud. And I think that's one of our faults, with the city of St. Louis, is that we suck at cheerleading, and we have for a long time. St. Louis has some amazing, amazing attributes to it. It has incredibly low cost of living. It has some of the best cultural institutions in the country. It has a fantastic mixture of people, restaurants, universities, hospitals, all these different, things that are amazing about it. But we're horrible at marketing, and I have no idea why. And actually, I do have an idea. We're too humble. We're too Midwestern in that respect, and we need to develop a little more swagger. And to do that, you've got to be loud, and you've got to show that we are amazing. That we do have a little hop in our step, and we can compete with anybody else out there. And so, yes, it is a little bit of a risk coming into these neighborhoods, but it also provides people in those neighborhoods hope that people are not giving up on them because it's incredibly easy to talk about change. It's a lot different when you put your money behind it and say, you know what, I'm going to take a good idea and I'm going to put millions of dollars behind it and then show you that I'm actually going to do it. And then I'm going to perform and do it. And then I'm going to do it again. And then I'm going to tell everybody about it. That's different. That's how you get transformative change in neighborhoods. And I've done it twice already in 2 different neighborhoods in the city, a neighborhood called Shaw and then another neighborhood called McKinley Heights. And we're doing it right now in another neighborhood called Mount Pleasant. And it's, once again, a neighborhood that probably not a lot of people in the city know of, but we believe in it. And we just made a significant investment in it last year. And once we get completed in that, we're going to start buying more around it.
Where is Mount Pleasant? I've never heard of it.
So that's the idea. That's the idea. That's why we're loud about it. So the development we bought was a schoolhouse from the 1890s. It's a gorgeous building right off of Highway 55. And it's a building that I have been eyeing for years. In a sense, and the reason is not necessarily because I'm looking at it, I'm going, man, how can I make money off of that? I was tired of looking at it because it looks so bad. And those are people that are passing through St. Louis and they're seeing that. And that's a reflection of our city, a reflection of who we are. It's kind of like having a nice suit on and then you got a big mustard stain on your suit. And it's like, oh man, you're so put together. You got almost everything right. But there's like that one thing that, if we could just clean that up. And so I saw it. And when the opportunity came up for us to buy it, I immediately jumped at it. And I was like, oh, this is a window to St. Louis right here. I have to get this. And so Mount Pleasant, right off 55 in South St. Louis, just north of Carondelet Park.
Okay.
And as it implies, it sits up a little bit. So you've got a beautiful view of the river. It's got some wonderful other neighborhoods around it that I think have a lot of promise. And I think it's one of the top, if I had to put my chips on something, and probably the number one question that I get from young developers, they always ask me, where do I buy? Where's the place to buy? And I always find that that's a funny question, because it's kind of like, where's the gold?
Right.
And, my response is like, look on the ground. Do you see any gold on the ground? And they're like, no. And I was like, you know why? Because you have to mine for it. You got to do what other people won't do. And you got to dig in a lot of different spots to find where the gold is, But when you do, attack it. And you have to go, when you're starting off as a young developer, you have to go into areas where you've got a low cost basis. And you're taking a little more risk because of that, i.e. crime, and buildings that are a little more run down. But your upside is massive because if that neighborhood takes off and your cost basis is, in the low couple $100,000, and now that building jumps up to a value of $500,000, $750,000, $1 million bucks, I mean, you're sitting on a ton of equity that you then can roll into another deal and have even more money. And that's what I did, in both of those neighborhoods that I mentioned, is that I started off with a cost basis in both those neighborhoods that was very low. Both of those neighborhoods did not have a lot of brand recognition at the time, or not as much. And as I started developing them, I broadcasted to the world exactly what I was doing to try to get more people down there to help raise the tide there.
And you're mainly doing like 4 to 12 unit buildings for the most part. Is that what makes up the majority of your portfolio?
No, so that's how I started off.
Okay.
I started off doing 2s and 4s and some 6s. And now I would say the majority of our portfolio is anything over 10 units. 10 to 60 units, that's kind of our sweet spot right now.
And was that a deliberate decision you made at some point where you were like, hey, we have some efficiencies if we're over 10, but we're able to execute better than our competition if we're under 60? And you decided at some point to only target those types of buildings or properties?
So that question reminds me of, someone contacted me yesterday who wants to learn about real estate development, and they started telling me, I was like, oh, well, what are you doing in real estate right now? And they said, well, we've got a couple single families that we have as Airbnbs. And I was like, that's the dumbest business model. And they're like, why? And I was like, okay, well, first of all, single family homes, horrible business model. And here's why. Let's say that you have 10 single family homes. All right. Well, you have 10 different locations. So a lot of windshield time to go from 1 to 1 to 1. Okay. From a management perspective, you've got 10 different roofs, 10 different foundations, 10 different plumbing systems, electrical systems, yards, driveways, all of these things to maintain, utility bills, property tax bills, all this stuff. It's a management nightmare. Okay. What if you could take, here's a bright idea, all of those 10 units and put them under one roof? Then you only have to go to one location. Then you only have to worry about one roof, one foundation, one MEP system.
One mortgage, one tax bill.
Yeah. It's incredibly easy. And so I took that same mentality with 2s and 4s, as I saw all the time it was taking me to rehab a duplex, to rehab a 4-family. And I was like, why am I doing this? This is death by 1,000 cuts. I can do this even faster if I buy a bigger building, but then bring on a bigger crew, and I'll have more efficiencies because I'll have more units under one roof. And that made all the difference for me is, taking the gains that I made in those smaller buildings when I first started off with that lower cost basis, and then selling them and doing 1031 exchanges into these larger buildings that have more efficiencies than the 2s and 4s. And so that's the pivot that we're on right now. And then we'll hold those for another 7 to 10 years. And then we'll get to a point where we go, okay, now it's time to 1031 those into the 100 unit or 200 unit complex. And we'll do that.
You're buying deals that are pretty hairy, like in terms of the current state of the deal. You're doing heavy value adds for the most part, like in terms of your construction projects for each deal. Is that correct? Are you only buying deals, in other words, that require a heavy renovation?
There's a lot that goes into that word renovation. And so, the way that I like to differentiate the two.
Let's just say you're not putting lipstick on a pig.
Yes and no. So when you're talking about a full gut rehab, like a full rehab, a gut rehab, you're taking that all the way down to the studs. Even you're taking out the subfloors and redoing the joists underneath it, and you're redoing everything. You're putting in, all new electric and plumbing and HVAC and, insulation and then drywall and, hardwood and all that jazz. Okay. That to me is a gut rehab. And that's really, really hard to do. And I've done a bunch of those. You only want to do that if the upside is really, really big. You've got tax credits associated with it. You bought it at such a low dollar amount that it's damn near impossible for you. Even if you have cost overruns, it's damn near impossible for you to lose money on that. Okay. But they take up so much time that unless you've got those incentives that are already there, it's really hard for that to make sense. The majority of the rehabs that we do today, I would classify more as what I call cosmetic rehabs. All right. Cosmetic rehabs, we just bought a 40-unit building on Monday. This is a perfect example of this. We're going into a building that was built back in the late 1950s, early 1960s. So kind of like that mod style. And we're gutting the bathrooms and the kitchens and putting in new bathrooms, new kitchens. We're taking up the carpet. Underneath the carpet, you've got perfect hardwood floor. So we'll refinish that. We'll paint the walls, put up new light fixtures, and we're done. We'll add a stackable washer dryer to the unit. We'll add a dishwasher to the unit and a microwave. But other than that, we're done. That process doesn't take long.
So you're not worried about electrical wiring, plumbing systems for a building of that age?
Oh, we already inspect those when we're doing our due diligence. So, when we looked at this particular building, I always tell young developers the most important thing when I'm looking at a building is the basement. That's where all your expenses are. I think the mistake that people make is they go after the shiny things. And so they'll see these units that are, these units are beautiful. And I can add a little paint here, this and that, but they'll be perfect. Well, the devil's in the details. You have to go behind the walls. And that's where your real expenses are. And so when a lot of these old buildings were built, they had cast iron plumbing. All right. Well, cast iron rots from the inside out. And a cast iron stack has a shelf life usually somewhere between 70 and 80 years. Okay. When that cast iron stack goes out, that means you have all of that waste going everywhere. And that means all the lines that are tied into that cast iron stack, the drains tied into it, are also shot, meaning you have to replace everything. So you could have a perfectly beautiful building on the outside. Okay. And when I say, like stainless steel appliances and quartz countertops and brand new cabinets and all this stuff. But if your stacks fail, you have to rip all of that out. And then when you rip out all the plumbing, you then have to update all the electric. The the people that do code enforcement are going to require you to do that. So you want to make sure that the stack isn't cast iron. That's always a big thing. 99% of the time you're going to have cast iron laterals, and that's to be expected. Inside the building. Outside the building, they're usually clay. And the clay lines, those things can go on for centuries, as long as you're keeping weeds out of them and they don't shift too much over time. But you will always see failures in the cast iron lateral lines. We already with this particular building that we purchased on Monday, we plan on replacing all of those. The stacks that were in this building that we bought were all copper. That's amazing. Anytime you can run into a building that has copper stacks or PVC stacks, great. That plumbing is going to continue to last forever. With respect to the electric, if we have to update electric in there, that's much, much easier than plumbing. Plumbing, you can't move. A stack has to line up with the other units. I can't have it go turn this way and that way. You can't have it do that. But electric, you can move those wires everywhere. And that's why when you're doing a rehab, your rough and wiring is the last thing that goes in. Your plumbing always goes in first. Your HVAC goes in next. And then after that, electric goes in because they can move their wires anywhere they need to go. So the electric is always the least of my concerns when I'm looking at a rehab project like that.
Would it be fair to say then that your secret sauce is three things: your unique ability to view deals or neighborhoods, and then you and your team's ability to perform the due diligence to de-risk a deal that has a certain amount of age on it, and then the third being your team's ability to operate assets that are kind of smaller for institutional sized operators?
I think you touched on it, but I'll use the word for it. So the massive advantage that we have is that we're vertically integrated. So we source all of our own deals. 99% of what we buy is not on the MLS, is not on the active market, so to speak. Okay. If something that we buy is off the public market, then either the public screwed up in terms of how they looked at it or how they priced it, or we just got lucky. But very, very rarely, anything that comes on the public market, very rarely is that a good deal. Very rarely it is. The majority of good deals in real estate are bought off market, and that's the benefit of real estate versus, equities, stocks, is that in real estate, you can trade on inside information, and with equities/stocks, you can't do that. You'll go to federal prison for that. So that gives us a huge advantage. We have a massive network that we've built up in St. Louis with brokers and owners that they know that when they want to sell something, that they'll come to us, and we'll give them a fair price and we can close quickly. And they know that we're experienced in this, so we're not going to haggle them on all these other issues. We have very, very specific things that we look at, and that's it. The other part of it is that we know how to GC all of our own deals. When I walk into a building, I know exactly how it's put together. I can take it apart with my eyes and I can put it right back together. And I can tell you exactly how we're going to lay it out and do all this different stuff. And I can do that ballpark within 10 minutes of me walking into a building. I know exactly what to do. But that comes from doing over 150 plus projects. And a lot of those gut rehabs, I've seen firsthand how these are done. It's not like I went to some construction school or anything like that, or involved in trades no. I had to pay for these things. I screwed up on these things so many different times that, once again, those are scars. You don't forget them. And so they're just imprinted in my mind every time I'm walking through a building and how I do evaluation of it. And then finally, we manage all of our own assets. We don't manage assets for other people. We only manage assets that we own. When you do that, you treat them differently because you have a vested interest in it. I think it's the dumbest thing in the world when I see developers sub out their management. If I was an investor, if I was a bank, and I saw an owner subbing out their management, that would raise a massive red flag to me. I mean, it would be akin to you going to Merrill Lynch and them saying, "Hey, Raj, I'd love to manage your money. We're going to make this for you every single year." And you give their money, and then you're like, "Hey, Merrill Lynch guy, where's my money?" We don't have your money. This guy over here is actually managing your money. Well, what are you paying this guy to do it for? What are you paying Merrill for? You're paying them to manage it, watch over it. They know this stuff. But now you got a third party working on it who has no vested interest in this. That to me makes no sense. And so I think management is incredibly important, that you have it on site or close by with people that have a vested interest in that particular property and live in those areas and understand those areas. I think that gives us an incredible advantage that I, for one, I live in the city. One of my kids goes to school in the city. I live and breathe the city. And so I know it really, really well. And I think it's a lot different when I have, a parent come into our office and they say, "Hey, is this area safe?" And I go to them, "Yeah, it's in the neighborhood right next door to mine, or it's a couple blocks away from my house." That's a big difference. I'm obviously not going to stay here if I feel like it's unsafe for my family. And that shows that I am invested in St. Louis and I believe in it. And I believe in these projects because I'm actually here.
I 100% agree with you, especially on the vertically integrated piece. We're the same way. Most of our deals are off market. We do our own operations. We don't operate for any third parties because I think that's our competitive advantage. And it sounds like that's yours as well, to a certain extent, the way you operate assets. One thing I really love about the US, I'm sure this exists in other countries as well, but I just think it speaks to the amount of opportunity here. Is we're essentially competitors. We're in the same business, except for the fact that we're in one geographical area, you're in another. What are your thoughts on just sharing information with people that are in the same industry as you? Because before we turned on the cameras, we were talking about building in public and the fact that you're not afraid to touch on any parts of your business with anyone. So do you ever feel the threat of competition?
Never. I'm in competition with myself, and I think that should be your biggest competitor is yourself. If you're focused on other people, you're focused on things that are not sustainable because you have no idea what their background is, how they got their start, what advantages they have. You don't have the same genes. It's not the same person. And so, I've learned to always stay in my lane and focus on continuing to put off a good work product. And if somebody beats me, in terms of getting a tenant and I couldn't get them, or getting a project and I didn't get it, that's on me. That's not on them. That's always on me. And, I think those are incredibly good learning lessons when you have those setbacks to say, what can I learn from this and how do we get better? But you're focusing on how I get better, how our company gets better. I'm not focusing on Raj. I'm not focusing on XYZ developer. I'm focusing on how we get better, as a company or me as a developer. And so I do not focus on other people. I've never focused on other people. And frankly, I don't have the time to do it. I think stay in your own lane, continue to put off a good work product, and it should take care of itself.
That's a great point that I fully agree with as well. You never know what someone's background is, or it doesn't even really matter. All you can do is improve yourself every single day and focus on what you're doing as a company, individual, whatever the case is. So that kind of ties into the last part of the show, which we're calling a hole in one. It's your best advice for someone to apply to their life or business or both. I know you have a lot of potential advice, so feel free to give a few hole in ones that they can apply today, tomorrow, this week, something in the short term, some sort of actionable insight that you think can improve a listener or viewer's life.
I think there's a couple things. I think the first one is, you have to take the first step. And the first step is always the hardest step. But you have to stop talking about it. And you have to, as the Nike slogan goes, just do it. And when you go into it, make sure that you're committed to do it. And if you find that you love it or you enjoy it, if you want to become great at it, you have to become obsessed about it. You truly have to become obsessed if you want to become great. I think my actions speak for itself. It showed that I was obsessed about becoming great at real estate by going down after working all day as a lawyer and then working on these properties at nighttime and on the weekends. That's crazy. Why would anybody do that? But I had that obsession. I wanted to become really good at this business. Early in my career, and even still to this day, I meet with my peers. I meet with people that have, are some of the best developers in St. Louis. And I still meet with them. I met with them very early in my career. So I could see that vision. I could see what it took to get to that level. And that takes your obsession to a whole nother level in terms of how you have to refine yourself and become better. And, the way that I look at refinement is very similar to, there's this famous sculptor from France named Auguste Rodin. And his most famous sculpture is The Thinker. It's the guy sitting on a rack like this. And when you go and see one of his sculptures. Sculptures, typically has they're a couple different mediums. They're marble, and they get cast in bronze and stuff like that. And so, but the marble ones are really neat to see because you're chipping away at a rock. And some of these sculptures of Rodin's, you can see where he's literally starting off with this really rough stone, and then you can see where he's finished another part of it, and it's like a perfect hand. And that's refinement in a nutshell, is that you have to start, don't be afraid that you're a rough rock. Everybody starts off being horrible at what they're about to get into. It's like riding a bike. Nobody in the history of riding a bike has ever successfully ridden a bike the first time. But you see enough people riding bikes around that you got to go in your head, well, enough people around me are riding bikes. I should be able to do this. And you get on the bike and you fall and it really hurts. And you keep falling, it really hurts. But you're like, I know this bike works. I know this invention works. And you keep doing it. And eventually you get to a point where it's second nature. That's why they say, like riding a bike. And that's the point that you have to get to with whatever businesses you want to get into, is that you have to get to a point where you've had the scrapes, you had the scars, but it then becomes second nature for you. And then you then take it to a whole nother level of, how can I push myself to become faster? How can I push myself to have more stamina? What heights do I really want to take this to, in riding this bike? And that's what young people have to seek, and they cannot look in 5-year, 10-year increments. You have to look much, much farther than that. Wealth is built over decades and decades and decades. And if you just approach it with that mindset of moving that ball down the field every single day, you're eventually going to look back. And how I look back isn't actually like me looking up my portfolio and going, oh, wow, look at that. It's really funny. How I look back and know that I'm getting somewhere where I want to go is I'll run into people that I haven't seen in a couple of years. And they're like, oh, Jarrad, you still doing the apartment thing? And man, how many units are you up to? I'll tell them and they'll be like, oh, I remember when you had like 20 units, or I remember when you had like 50 units, or I remember when you just first started off. And you hear that and you go, oh, wow. And I forgot the gentleman that said this, but he said, successful people are too busy to notice their success. And that's how it should be. The people that notice their success are the people that are on social media flashing it to you. And that's wrong. You should be focused on your trade. You should be focused on being great, and all the great ones. Then once they retire, or when somebody asks them a question about, hey, Jordan, what about your 6 championships? Then you can look back and you can say, wow, I was able to do all that. But in the moment, you can't do that, and Kobe Bryant's got a great line about this. He was in the playoffs, and I tell people about this all the time, in an interview, and he was up 2-0. And this reporter asked him, why aren't you smiling? You're up 2-0 in the playoffs. And he goes, job's not finished. He goes, we won the championship yet? No, job's not finished. And I love that. This is one of the greatest players in the world. And he's still not satisfied being up 2-0 against somebody in the playoffs because he knows the job's not done. He knows that it's not time yet to look back on the season, with happiness. He's still focused on the end goal, which is winning a championship. And that's how we focus on every one of our projects. Is I have blinders on. I don't care about my competitors. I don't care about my naysayers. All I am focused on is completing that project and having a successful outcome for our investors and bankers. That's it. That's my singular focus. Maybe ADHD gives me that advantage, but that's all I focus on. And then when it's finally done and I send that email out, letting people know what their returns are going to be, then that's my look back. That's when I get a chance to go, okay, now we got it. Let's go on to the next one now.
I love it. Great point. I think really actionable for anyone that's listening. I know we both have to go back to pushing the ball down the field, so I appreciate your time. I really do. Is there any easy way for people to learn more about you or your company, or can people reach out to you directly, perhaps?
Sure. So you can look me up on LinkedIn, just Jarrad Holst, Jarrad Holst, Holst, or you can shoot me an email, Jarrad, Jarrad, at 1904group.com.
Thanks, Jarrad. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Raj.
If you're a high-quality company interested in reaching the high-performing audience of Country Club Conversations, let's see how we can work together. To explore sponsorship opportunities, email advertising@storyboardliving.com. That's advertising@storyboardliving.com.